evening, everybody. Welcome. Hi, I'm Jesse Lazar. I'm the Executive Director here at AIA New York in the Center for Architecture. I want to welcome everyone to the Future of Public Space and Art, History and Memory, the first event in a four-part series that will expand on this year's 2024 presidential theme, Belonging and Beyond. The series aims to challenge us to discover better design strategies for the public realm that welcomes all people. During our time here, we hope to think of ways we can re-envision our public spaces and the public art that inhabits them in ways that are more representative of our collective voices. When Anne-Marie Baranowski was first developing the ideas around this for this series, it just kind of worked out really well timing-wise that this year's President Gregory Switzer has this theme, Belonging and Beyond, and we were excited to kind of put them together, so we're very happy that worked out here. Before we get into things, I want to thank a couple of our sponsors. Our lead sponsors tonight, UAP, and the members of the 2024 President's Circle. Our sponsor, Gregory Switzer Architecture, and supporter, DLR Group. So right now, I'd like to bring up AIA President Greg Switzer, who will continue to welcome and speak a little bit more in depth about his theme, Belonging and Beyond. Thank you.
Good evening again, and welcome. This year's 24 presidential theme, Belonging and Beyond, centers on the crucial aspect of human well-being that improves physical and socio-emotional health and resilience for individuals and communities. Belonging refers to a deep connection with social groups, physical places, and individual and collective experiences. This year's theme calls us to be intentional about inclusion by listening and workshopping ideas worth advocating for and amplifying. Belonging asks us to focus especially on the areas of affordability, exclusion, displacement, homelessness, climate change, and other patterns preventing people's sustained connection with physical spaces and each other. I'm pleased to introduce the first in tonight's series, The Future of Public Space and Art, History and Memory, which focuses on many of the important components in my presidential theme. In this first program, History and Memory takes inspiration from the words of Dr. John N. Lowe, Professor of History and American Indian Studies at Ohio State University. History is not truth, it's memory, and a part of memory is considering what we forgot. I hope this discussion tonight allows us to think about placemaking and how exchanges of interdisciplinary ideas can improve the future of public space, art, and social equality. Tonight's program will explore what has been left out of our public spaces and public art installations that require a fresh perspective. How is placemaking tied to collective memory? How is landscape a witness to our history? And with that, I'd like to hand it over to the lovely Miss Susan West, the co-chair of our Cultural Facilities Committee. Thank you. Yes.
Hello, and let me be the third person to welcome you to this evening's presentation. We're incredibly proud of this project, and I'm very happy you're here on the first of four of the events planned for this series, Belonging and Beyond, the Future of Public Space and Art. I also have been asked to speak just a little bit about the Cultural Facilities Committee, which is the committee I co-chair with my beloved co-chair Joe Auld, and we're very proud that this project has come from our committee. It's a big project, and everyone is very, very excited about it. The Cultural Facilities Committee is a forum for those interested in cultural spaces and how they shape our environment, and this is certainly an example of that. Through a variety of programs, the committee examines aspects of cultural landscapes and ideas related to the design and planning of cultural buildings as well as their impact on communities they serve. The vision of the committee is to enrich and broaden the insight of practitioners in the design field, foster an understanding among professionals working within cultural facilities, and illuminating the development process for the public. So, that said, I would like to introduce the mastermind of this wonderful project, Anne-Marie Baranowski.
All right. As if you hadn't heard enough thank yous. I myself have to thank a number of people who have been really essential to putting this whole series together. And not only did they help put it together, they supported it and they provided lots of patience for the process. So, and for those who don't know about committee work at the New York AIA, it's an all-volunteer proposition. So you've got to appreciate the kind of heart that's gone into planning these programs. I would like to thank, excuse me, personally, Susan West and Joe Auld from the Cultural Facilities Committee. A couple of our team members who've been indispensable in helping us reach out to potential panelists and program sponsors, and that's Taylor Knocke and Kelly Hardiman. Thank you, guys. And what doesn't get enough spoken about either is the incredible people behind this organization that make these programs happen. So thanking Jesse, who you heard speak, our executive director, also Suzanne Mex, Salmata Kaba and Joe Corbin, who are our programs coordinators. There's a lot of names here, so bear with me. Iyavo Babatunde, Teresa Illis, and Ruth Cole, who are with the AIA New York Development Group, and also Megan Edwards and Lynn Kim from our AIA New York Communications Group. They've all really been essential in putting this together, and I never realized how much until going through this process. So thank you, guys. And last but not nearly least is my thanks to Greg Switzer, this year's chapter president, whose your unflagging support and your theme, Belonging and Beyond, propelled this series into being. Thank you, Greg. So, well, we hope you'll enjoy tonight's program and the series. I want to tell you a little bit about the series as well as tonight's program. The series is organized in a progression from the broad and deep roots of history and memory to some specific and speculative ideas of craft and technology, where we will be examining the future of public art and public space. The second program, I feel compelled to mention it, is called New Perspectives on Public Space, and it will take place on September 19th here at TAFL. In addition to 2 more programs in October and November, there will be as well 2 to 3 companion tours, all to be announced for the fall season. So stay tuned, as they say. As a practicing architect with deep interest in the intersection of public space and public art, I work on projects where art and architecture meet, and I continually evaluate their success in the public realm. Through the lens of Greg's theme, Belonging and Beyond, the series focuses on examples of public placemaking as a crucial aspect of our shared physical, social, and environmental health. An overarching question of the series is, how can art and architecture inform each other and result in something greater than when each element is taken alone? In addition to better understanding how inspired placemaking enriches experience and provides social benefit, we will also be considering design as an optimistic, collaborative act that requires precise integration. Tonight's program, let's see if I can advance this. Tonight's program examines the issues of history and memory. While history may represent collective memory, it has often been a selective memory that originates from a European viewpoint. I share with you the acknowledgements on the screen. An alternative frame of reference is that history can be a tool for understanding diverse perspectives, for us to learn a new design language to interpret the importance of the past on our future. My hope is that from a close exploration of these diverse ways of looking, new insight will emerge for making public space and art from which we all mutually thrive. It's my honor to share the stage tonight with these three speakers that you see listed here. I'll begin by introducing Dr. Wendy Ikemoto. Wendy Nailani E. Ikemoto, PhD, is Vice President and Chief Curator at the New York Historical Society, where she leads the Museum Division. She has curated such exhibitions as K Walking Stick, Hudson River School, Nature, Crisis, Consequence, Monuments, Commemoration and Controversy, Dreaming Together, New York Historical Society and Age Society Museum, and the award-winning Scenes of New York City, the Ellie and Sarah Hirschfield collection. She oversees the museum's paintings, sculpture, and drawings collection and has spearheaded major acquisitions, including works by Betty Saar, Augusta Savage, Oscar E. Hu, Kay Walking Stick, Robert Kobayashi, and Livian Yen. She established the institution's Meet the Curator program and helped to develop and teach in the Master of Arts in Museum Studies program created jointly between New York Historical Society and the City University of the New York School of Professional Studies. For International Women's Day in 2024, Ikemoto was profiled in the New York Times. She holds a BA in art history from Stanford University and a AM and PhD in the history of art and architecture from Harvard University. Please welcome warmly Dr. Wendy Ikemoto.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much to AIA New York for inviting me to speak here today, especially to Anne-Marie. I really appreciate the opportunity. I've never spoken to a group of professional architects before, and I really admire the work that you do in shaping the way we move about this world. It's an absolutely incredible career that you have chosen. I do also just want to make a plug. We just opened a show called Lost New York that does feature a lot of architecture, including beautiful architectural presentation drawings of the old Penn Station, Crystal Palace, etc. So you might be interested in stopping by. So in 2022, we opened an exhibition called Monuments, Commemoration, and Controversy. And this was really to engage in the debates that were roiling at that time around public monuments, who is represented in our public spaces, what do we do about the debates, and also to engage those debates with history, to draw out the long lineage that the contemporary debates share with controversies happening in the context of this nation all the way back to its founding. So that's why we opened the exhibition with this juxtaposition of a statue vandalized in 1776, likely by British soldiers. This was a statue of William Pitt that has obviously been beheaded and disarmed. And we set it against a series of rotating images of monuments removed or otherwise vandalized in the present day. So we wanted to immediately start the exhibition with that line of continuity between past and present to make the point that a lot of the controversies that we feel are so of this moment actually have this very long history behind them. Inside the gallery, we organized the exhibition into a series of vignettes grouped around specific monuments. So we move chronologically from the left wall down to the back wall and to the right wall through time from the founding of the nation to the present day. I'm going to talk about just a few of the vignettes. The first one centers around this recreated model, small-scale model of a monument of King George III that used to stand in Bowling Green. So if you know Bowling Green, you know that this monument no longer stands there. And the reason why is really a fascinating story. On July 9th, 1776, a number of New York colonists and Continental soldiers gathered together in what is today City Hall Park, and they listened to a public reading of the freshly written Declaration of Independence. So they heard these 26 indictments outlining this man's repeated injuries and usurpations, this tyrant who had unleashed tyranny over these states, and they grew really impassioned and they grew really emboldened, and they turned and they walked down Broadway toward Bowling Green with their sights set on this absolutely monumental gilded lead equestrian statue of King George III on an 18-foot pedestal that presided over the colonies, and they tore that monument down. And they broke it into pieces, they used their fingernails, they scraped the gilding off the monument, and they carted the remaining fragments of lead off to Connecticut to be made into bullets for use by the Continental Army. So one of the period reports said that the royal troops would likely have melted majesty fired at them. So you can see in the display, and we have the recreated monument, that is the actual tail from the horse. And this is a set of bullets from the Revolutionary War. And this is a painting. These are both paintings that look back upon that seminal event. So the guiding question for this vignette was, were the colonists making history or erasing history? Obviously, this is a question that is at the root of a lot of our culture wars today around monuments, and it was meant to provoke thought and maybe to provide a historical perspective onto that question. You know, were they erasing history in this ancient Roman practice of damnatio memoriae, scrubbing every last trace of somebody they wanted to, be rid of from the public sphere? Or were they making history by pulling down that monument, leaving the pedestal up for 40 years as a monument to their hard-won liberation? So the second vignette I want to talk about centers around this work by Augustus Savage, an absolutely pivotal figure in the Harlem Renaissance, not only a sculptor, also an activist and also an educator. The work is called Lift Every Voice and Sing. It's a very, very powerful work. I think, as you can see, we are looking at 12 young Black choir singers who are compressed together in unity and solidarity. The folds of their robes become the strings of a harp. There's a young figure at the kneeling in the front who becomes the foot pedal of the harp. And the work becomes a visual manifestation of that very powerful song, which is often known today as the Black National Anthem. The hand in which the choir singers stand is often referred to as the hand of God, picking up on the religiosity of Lift Every Voice and Sing. I also like to think of it as perhaps the hand of Savage herself, because she is somebody who devoted her career to building an infrastructure through education by founding the first Black woman-owned gallery to uplift her community. So this work is her signature work, often considered her signature work. It dates to 1839. It was commissioned by the 1939, did I say 19? I meant 1939, I think it was commissioned by the 1939 New York World's Fair. It was the only work by a Black woman artist to be commissioned by that fair. And Life magazine reported that Savage was one of few Black people to be commissioned by the fair to do anything but pick and shovel work. So this was an absolute feat. She was a woman, she was Black, this was the 1930s, this was Jim Crow, and she won this commission. And her monument was soaring, as you can see, or you can get a sense of the scale from the studio photograph with Savage in front of her work. It was over 16 feet tall. It was displayed in a very prominent place in front of the Contemporary Arts Building of the fair. It was seen by over 5 million viewers, and it was bulldozed at the end of the fair. So it no longer exists. This is not uncommon for works built for World's Fairs, but unfortunately it was a pattern in Savage's career. Only about half of her known works survive today. So I wanted to draw out in this exhibition the contrast between the destruction of the King George Monument and the destruction of the Savage Monument. At least I tend to think today that monuments come down because through acts of iconoclasm, through acts of activism, acts of protest. But in this case, a monument came down because of systemic racism, because of systemic inequality. And so it didn't combat those structures of power, the erasure of this sculpture, it reinforced those structures of power. So the guiding question of this vignette was, what have we lost? Or put another way, what do we choose to preserve? And this is where the quote from the Potawatomi scholar John Lowe appeared in the exhibition, history is not truth, history is memory, and we need to attend to what we've forgotten. So this is the last vignette I'll talk about. This was a set of sculptures at the end of the exhibition, works by contemporary Black women artists that are working against monuments like the one on the left. That's a print that was in the exhibition of the 1876 Emancipation Memorial, which stands in Washington, D.C. And as you can see, just compositionally, this is a work that conveys a narrative of white saviorism. I mean, of a Black man who is crouching, who is being lifted up by Lincoln and given freedom, when in fact the model for that crouching figure was Archer Alexander, who emancipated himself. And so the work of Alison Sarr, of Barbara Chase Rabeau, are pushing against those types of historical narratives that seem to dominate a lot of our public monuments landscape. On the left, you're looking at a maquette for a monument to Harriet Tubman that stands in Harlem. And this is a very engaging work of art. We are looking at the figure of Tubman that takes the form of the Underground Railroad. So her arms are chugging along. Her petticoat forms the front grade of a train. You can't quite see them, but she's pulling up the roots of slavery behind her as she moves forward, and she's carrying on her skirt the faces and the belongings of the people that she led to freedom after emancipating herself in her astonishing estimated 13 trips back to the South to lead others toward freedom. And then on the right, you're looking at a maquette of a never realized monument to Sojourner Truth by Barbara Chase Rabeau. In my personal opinion, it is one of the most mesmerizing, striking works of art in our entire collection at the New York Historical Society. This is a work that you can see is built of these almost cubist facets that give Sojourner's figure a sense of movement, a sense of dynamism, but that also read almost like armor, as if they're protecting the figure. I wanted to set up a dialogue between this sculpture and the King George Equestrian Monument across the gallery, because here we have not a male statesman who is astride his steed, leading the rest of us, presiding over us. We have a figure who has dismounted from her horse and who is walking alongside that horse, holding out her lantern into the implied night and leading us forward and illuminating the pathway for us. So the question here was, how can new monuments change history? And I do think that history is changeable. It is not static, it is dynamic. So in the center of the gallery, we featured this pedestal modeled after the 18-foot tall one upon which King George stood. And we offered visitors an iPad preloaded with an app called Kinfolk, which they could use and hold up against toward the pedestal to picture these augmented reality monuments to Black and brown individuals. This was a way of sort of picking up the pace of the change of our monuments landscape by cutting through all of the red tape, using our augmented reality to make these changes immediate. And then we had this stand here with sticky notes and pencils, and we posed this question to our visitors: what should stand on a public pedestal? And so visitors would write their answers on these sticky notes and put them on top of the pedestal, and it became really a community art installation project and performed the democratic conversation that I think should underlie the determination of what should stand on our public pedestals. So I would say that, you know, as I said, history is not static. History is changing. History is dynamic. Interestingly, the president of the Western Sanitary Commission, which was behind that 1876 Emancipation Monument, said at the unveiling, it will be left to you and those who follow to determine how wisely or how well this was done. So even he acknowledged, you know, the monuments landscape is meant to change. And so I liked ending our exhibition on that question to visitors: what should stand on a public pedestal? Because it involved all of us in this ongoing and collective process of writing and rewriting our public history. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy. That was wonderful. It's a great introduction to all the issues we're going to be covering. Our next speaker is Alan Michelson. And Alan is an internationally recognized New York-based artist, curator, writer, lecturer, and Mohawk member of the Six Nations of the Grand River. For over 30 years, he has been a leading practitioner of a socially engaged, critically aware, site-specific art grounded in local context and informed by the retrieval of suppressed histories. Recent exhibitions include the 14th Gwangju Biennale, Emished at the Tate Modern, and Greater New York 2021 at MoMA PS1, which is where I first saw his work. His solo exhibition, Alan Michelson, Wolf Nation, was presented at the Whitney Museum of American Art in 2019. Michelson's work is represented in several collections, including the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian, the National Gallery of Canada, and the Art Gallery of Ontario. His diverse practice includes award-winning public art and Mantle, his permanent site-specific monument honoring Virginia's Indian nations, which was dedicated at the Capitol in Richmond in 2018. His essays have appeared in Aperture, Frieze, and October, and his work has been featured in numerous publications, including the New York Times and Art in America. Michelson was a co-founder and co-curator of the groundbreaking Indigenous New York series with the Vera List Center for Art and Politics at the New School, on whose board he currently serves. And he is a curatorial advisor of the Global Indigenous Initiative, ABACWAD. Please warmly welcome Alan Michelson.
Thank you, Anne-Marie, and thank you, AIA New York, for inviting me. When people speak of local history in New York, it almost inevitably refers to recent history, dating to the arrival of Europeans in Lenape-Hoking 400 years ago by ship in colonial ventures. This history has been selectively maintained in numerous sites: books, archives, images, curricula, plaques, monuments, cinema, spectacles, and civic holidays as a triumphalist narrative,
But there is a more accurate and disturbing history emerging, the history of Turtle Island seen from indigenous perspectives, largely through the combined efforts of indigenous artists, scholars, and activists and their non-indigenous allies. And art is one of the leading sites of this emergence. In my multiple decade site-specific practice, my focus has been on sites whose indigeneity was cashiered to the point of oblivion, whose value was assessed from a set of alien perspectives: feudal, patriarchal, hierarchical, racist, misogynist, acquisitive, extractive, and violent that identified as Christian. The crises of the past several years, deadly pandemic, dysfunctional governance, blatant racism, official lies and misinformation, mass shootings, dire environmental degradation, forced displacement, invasion and warfare, have been described as unprecedented, but are not so to indigenous people because we have been enduring them for half a millennium. The colonial philosophy exported and maintained here is one of property over relation, extraction over reciprocity, domination over diplomacy, hierarchy over humility, hoarding over sharing, taking over giving, of manipulation over ethics, of amnesia over memory. It is incompatible with our indigenous lifeways, those of our non-human relations, and with the land, skies, and waters that sustain us. For me, art has been first a vehicle of self-education, for asking what, how, and why questions and pursuing those answers through the where, through the study of specific sites and the surfacing of their submerged histories. As an indigenous person, in my case, Ganyengahaga or Mohawk, whose extensive homelands 100 miles to the north were taken through coercion and swindle, it is a fraught and painful endeavor, but still necessary. Because these histories need to be aired and confronted for the destruction to stop, and the grounds broken for a more just and sustainable future. In this talk, my focus is on two of my projects more than 3 decades apart that are joined by a pile of shells that no longer exist. Pawn to prison. In Roman law, there are 3 basic rights relating to possession: usus, the right to use; fructus, the right to enjoy the products of a property, for instance, the fruit of a tree; and abusus, the right to damage or destroy. David Graeber and David Wengrow, The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity, 2021. When in 1989 I was invited by the Public Art Fund to create a temporary outdoor site-specific installation, I already had a site in mind, a pocket park in Lower Manhattan called Collect Pond Park. Its name seemed a non sequitur. What did this nondescript park surrounded by courthouses on all sides have to do with an unfamiliar pond? On an earlier visit to the city during the 80s, I was browsing through a host's book, The Columbia Historical Portraits of New York, an essay in graphic history, and came across a baffling image of a pond framed by a colossal hill and a lush willow. The caption for the image, a reproduction of a 1798 watercolor by Archibald Robertson, identified it as the Collect, a deep spring-fed freshwater pond that once occupied some 48 acres above present Foley Square. Rendered in the background of the picture was a view of Manhattan at the turn of the 19th century. The steeples of the Middle Dutch Church, Trinity Church, and St. George's Chapel, echoing the verticals of the 3 strolling figures in the foreground. Behind them at the left looms Bayard's Mount, a steep hill located in what is now Chinatown. Compared to this picturesque portrayal, the story of the pond and its demise is shocking. A kettle lake left by the retreat of the glacier that chiseled the landscape of New York 15,000 years ago, its waters and marshes were home to numerous indigenous species of plant and animal life. It was also an ancient indigenous human site, one of freshwater fishing and feasting, as evidenced by the monumental oyster shell middens left on its western shore. The Munsee Lenape called the area Werpos. When the Dutch arrived in the early 1600s, they renamed it Kalkhoek, or Chakhoek, after the shell middens, a name later corrupted by the English to collect. It was the first source of drinking water for the New Amsterdam colony and a locus of summer fishing and winter skating, yet the pristine state of the pond did not long survive its colonial occupation. Sometime during the mid-18th century, a tannery was allowed to establish itself on the pond and pollute it with its tannins, followed by further polluting tanneries, breweries, and slaughterhouses. By 1800, industrial waste had thoroughly poisoned the pond, and the stench of animal fat, grease, manure, and curing hides followed the air, realities not conveyed in Robertson's rendering. Ecocide is the term used to describe such a crime against nature. As in a murder, the perpetrators sought to bury their victim, first by draining the collect's outlet to the Hudson, in the process transforming a sleepy creek into a fetid canal, later covered over to form Canal Street, and then by leveling the surrounding hills in Muncie Middens and using them as landfill. Renamed Paradise Square and slated for residential development, the land began to sink and stink as vegetation buried in the fill rotted away. Far from paradise, the area evolved into the notorious crime-ridden slum called the 5 Points. If the pond was a victim whose grave was the landfill, its headstone was the equally notorious prison built on its plot in 1838, the New York Halls of Justice and House of Detention, known as the Tombs for its massive mausoleum-inspired Egyptian revival architecture. It was thus described by Charles Dickens during his 1842 visit. Such indecent and disgusting dungeons as these cells would bring disgrace upon the most despotic empire in the world. Men and women against whom no crime is proved lie here all night in perfect darkness, surrounded by the noisome vapors, and breathing this filthy and offensive stench. Besides incarcerating inmates in its damp, forbidding cells, the Tombs hanged some 50 convicts in its yard during its 64 years of existence. The Tombs moniker stuck to its 3 successors on or around its spot, including the Manhattan Detention Complex, now under demolition and slated for replacement by a high-rise jail tower opposed by the local community. The history of the pond's former site was on my mind when I received the commission in 1989. At the time, I was an artist in residence at Snug Harbor Cultural Center, formerly Sailors Snug Harbor, a complex for aged and infirm sailors originally built in the 1830s on a 130-acre plot in Staten Island. There was a pond on the property, and that summer I started taking 14 by 22-inch plaster casts of its muddy shoreline, each the size of a page of the New York Times. In the process, I captured the tracks of a blue heron, a pond denizen, but also pieces of broken bottles and other trash. My project expanded to include castings of off-site objects related to the natural and social history of the collect, things like oyster shells, reeds, deer and raccoon tracks, flint corn, antique ice skates, and an anchor. From these molds, I cast 40 wedge-shaped concrete blocks, and in September, with the paid assistance of about 40 homeless men living under the overhang of the civil courthouse at the time, arranged them on the park's paving stones in the shape of the pond. I borrowed the title of the piece, Earth's Eye, from Thoreau's Walden, and inscribed this quotation from it on the outside edges of the block. "A field of water betrays the spirit that is in the air." Thoreau's reference was to the effects wind or rain leave on the surface of a pond. Mine was to the spirit in the air that betrayed the water, exploited it, and then, viewing it as a hindrance to development, abandoned and erased it, as it did the Muncies from Lenape-Hoking, along with its flora and fauna. In a recent conversation with writer Christopher Green, he observed that concrete blocks double as the chalk outline of a murder victim, the park itself as a crime scene. There is no justice in this pond-to-prison pipeline. More than a pond was lost, a whole world was destroyed and its keepers banished. When I was invited to show in the Greater New York 2021 exhibition at MoMA PS1, I had the idea to explore areas of New York Harbor that were once some of the richest oyster grounds in the world, shoot footage of their present shorelines, and project it onto a midden of oyster shells. Indigenous middens like the one at Collect Pond once dotted the landscape up and down the East Coast, like this large oyster midden, the Glidden midden in Maine, until they were either destroyed for shoreline development or the shells burned for lime or used as fill. They were much more than mere piles of trash. Some contained burials, and some were built into rings, monumental ceremonial structures. They are and were testament not only to the natural bounty of the area and its hundreds of miles of shoreline, but to the sound ecological practices and traditional knowledge of the Lenape and other indigenous communities over millennia. A midden that was unearthed in the late 90s up the Hudson and Dobbs Ferry was dated to 6950 BCE. There's an article about it. These are the oyster shell piles of the Billion Oyster Project on Governor's Island, the nonprofit organization with whom I partnered on the work entitled Midden from 2021. The signage at their restoration sites reads, "The Billion Oyster Project is a 20-year restoration and education initiative conducted by New York City students, teachers, and citizen scientists." What they do is regularly collect shells from dozens of area restaurants, cure them in piles on the island, and reintroduce them back into the harbor in the form of oyster reefs, which they seed with oyster spat they grow in shipping containers in Brooklyn. They're simple but brilliant ideas for the harbor to clean itself. A single oyster can clean up to 50 gallons of water a day, and their goal is to deposit 1 billion into the harbor. The project is allied with the New York Harbor School, the New York City Public School that prepares students for maritime and environmental careers, and the students are a key hands-on component of the project to restore the harbor's ecosystem. I shot from one of their boats. I shot the project from one of their boats with the students. I'll close my, this is the installation. Actually, this is the installation in Korea last year. And the shells were then donated by the local oyster fishery cooperative, the Tongyang Oyster Fishery Cooperative then. This is a closer shot of it. It's about 30 feet long by about 6 feet high. I'm going to show a brief clip of it. I'll just give you the setup. The soundtrack is a recording of the songs of the Ganetwe, or the Lenape Skin Dance, which were entrusted for safekeeping by the Lenape to my Haudenosaunee ancestors during a period of colonial cultural upheaval. As such, these songs are also site-specific, the songs of this land, of Lenape-Hoking. I structured the video after the song structure. It plays when the lead singer is singing and pauses, revealing the bear shells during the call and response with his fellow singers. It's just a short clip. Do I have to hit it again? Not sure if I... Those that came here dismissed indigenous people as uncivilized savages, yet we're the ones to whom it would never occur to poison and erase a pond and build an execution ground on its site, or to drive us unthinkingly into this catastrophic climate mess. For those reasons and more, we are asking for our land back. Art, with its enormous power to engage both the head and heart, with its capacity to expose and critique, but also to encourage and console, to be a voice for what someone once called voiceless creation, to grieve and to stand for beauty in all its forms, including justice. Art can be what we indigenous people call medicine, and never has this medicine been more needed than now. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alan. Our final speaker of the evening is Renee Kemp-Rotan, and I'll tell you a little bit more about her here. Renee Kemp-Rotan is the principal and CEO of Studio Rotan, a civic design, civic engagement firm. Her work is devoted to urban design, cultural heritage, and the power of design to impact social change. She has served 10 mayors as the urban policy advisor in major US cities, such as Washington, DC, New York City, Atlanta, and most recently, Birmingham, where she was the director of capital projects. Kemp-Rotan also served as the director of master planning for Birmingham's award-winning $22 million Railroad Reservation Park and the innovative Birmingham Civil Rights Heritage Trail. Most recently, Kemp Rotan served as the professional competition advisor to the Africatown International Design Idea Competition, one of the largest multi-site competitions in the world, launched Juneteenth, 2020. The open competition was to design 4 sites and 16 venues to commemorate Africatown as a unique 19th century African-American settlement built by emancipated Africans in 1865 and still inhabited by descendants of the last slave ship Clotilda, recently found in Mobile Bay, Alabama. The competition, seed funded by the AIA, NOMA, and A Better Place Foundation, awarded international winners in 2023. Presently, she is working on a design grant from the NEA and master plans for small Black towns and settlements chartered after the Civil War. She is also competing in numerous national competitions on slave memorials throughout the United States. Please welcome warmly, Renee.
Good evening, friends. Let's see. I'm going to give a very short intro, and my presentation is fairly much automated. That way I can stay within the 15 minutes, right? Okay, originally when Anne Marie asked me to join this panel to talk about history and memory, I was just going to focus on the Africatown International Design Idea Competition, which had been my obsession for literally 5 full years. I live in Birmingham. I was driving 4 hours to Africatown once a month, spending a week trying to figure out how design could help to transform this recently discovered but horribly blighted settlement. Africatown is the only settlement in the United States that was built in the 19th century by Africans in America. The exodusters, the chartered Black towns, those were all done by African Americans. So this really led to the notion of what can design do if a crazy woman decides she's going to program not 1 site, but 4 sites with 16 venues that all have to respond to community needs, but in a way in which architecture actually becomes part of a cultural identity quest. So, in just 1 minute, we're going to go through some of the things that I had to do with regard to extractions about history and memory of this long-forgotten place. If the Clotilda had not been found, we would not know about Africatown. It's been there forever. So the competition also had an opportunity to say, if you can save the ship, you can also save the town. But in addition to talking about Africatown, my total obsession, I decided I would go into my portfolio over a period of, I won't tell you how many decades, but I went into my portfolio and started looking at other examples of projects in which I have used architecture, architectonics, urban design to get into this history and also cultural discussion. All right, can we start the slides, please, or do I do it? I advance them myself. Oh, okay, yeah, history and memory, that's me, okay. So I run Studio Rotan now. It's a civic design and civic engagement firm. I've been doing it for a while. These are some of the examples of my work that you're going to see very quickly. They're going to be automated, so I hope it won't be too boring for you. So this is the Africatown International Design Idea Competition. The website garnered 20,000 hits worldwide, which was phenomenal. We ended up having 118 registrants and 23 design teams from around the world who submitted. So I started looking at this and I said, you know, there are a number of ways that history can be interpreted. One is through a series of timelines, all right? So you can kind of keep up visually and pictorially as how a community rises and also falls. So I'm kind of pictorially taking you through 1860 when the 110 happened. Then I also did a series of video animations because I realized that history and memory can also be interpreted through the kind of infographics that you bring to a design problem. So if you just watch this. motivated to know why are you doing a competition in Africatown? Who cares? Because a competition really allows designers to answer these kinds of questions. And these are the questions that the community wanted to have answered by design. The competition happened on 4 sites, not just one. Not just about place making, but place knowing. So history can also be interpreted through mapping. And this is a 2-minute video about the international slave trade. What we have not been told. Pretty soon you're going to see black dots crossing the ocean. Those are slave ships that were carrying precious cargo. African-born human beings literally dragged to the New World without their permission. And what's so astounding about this is that the slave trade was bigger than the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. This was not about a 3-boat activity. They take you up to 1860 because 1860 is when the flotilla decided it was going to do its sail. So the majority culture says to people of color, African Americans, slavery, why don't you get over it? This is why we can't get over it. This is so much a part of our blood memory, even though we don't even know the depths of the story. We know something happened, and it was quite monumental. So, for those of you who are educators in the audience, it would be great to give to a bunch of 3rd graders the question, how many boats does it take to drag 12 million Africans across an ocean over a period of 400 years? Get your calculators out, do the math, come on, quickly. Now, interestingly, what happens in 1808, the United States outlawed the international slave trade. So you're going to see the dots in 1808 stop coming to North America. Primarily, they're still going to South America, okay? While the international slave trade was stopped by the United States, guess what? The domestic slave trade was not. So in 1860, in Mobile, Alabama, 3 white men made a bet that they could not illegally cross the ocean and bring back 110 African enslaved people, and they did. So we made a competition about it. Everybody talks about the boat, the boat, the boat. And the history of Africatown, the competition was asking the question, what about Africatown's future? So this is the way that I organize the competition. There are 4 sites, 1, 2, 3, 4. You select a site, and then you would have to design 4 venues for each site. So I would end up literally getting an ensemble of solutions, an ensemble of buildings. And then I realized that when I connected each of the sites from a 30,000-degree view, all the sites are connected by both land and water. So now I can create the Africatown Cultural Mile. And the history is much bigger than the ever-shrinking historic Africatown district in circle number 1. So these, in fact, are the entries, the winning entries. You read them vertically, 1, 2, 3, 4. That was WXY, a Chinese firm won the 2nd, Jamaica won the 3rd, and this is a team from South Africa. These are some of the big ideas that centered around Site 1, which was historic Africatown. This is site 2. This is a 40-acre site, an abandoned public housing site. These are the winning entries. Jerome Hafford, a Chinese firm, won 2nd place. Moody Nolan won 3rd place. Whoops, moving fast. Move right along. This is the 3rd site. This is all water edge sites. You had to design the Africatown Yacht Club and also a fleet of boats that could be owned by the community so they could basically make money doing eco tours. This is the 4th site. These are the winners. And one honorable mention came from Nicole Holland Dennis, who worked on the New York African Burial Ground. But these are the big ticket items. So memory, in fact, can happen in a number of ways, through research and also through civic engagement with a number of organizations where you're literally talking to the community that's most affected. Memory can also happen through historic interviews. Zora Neale Hurston interviewed Cudjoe Lewis, the founder of Africatown, and I kept saying, well, what did the house look like? I used Zora's words in her photographs from 1927, and literally through photogrammetry, I now have the construction drawings and a CAD drawing of his house because of her photography in 27 and her interviews with this guy. And the book, Barracoon, if you haven't read it, you've got to read the book, Barracoon, edited by none other than the great Deborah Plant. So interviews also play a role in what we choose to remember and how we go about interpretation. Whoops. All right. The other thing that becomes very important in terms of documenting history really has to do with how do you capture, market, and also promote the history and your viewpoint that you're trying to basically share with the general public. These are just some of the articles that came out about the competition in the architectural press that were very important to us. And then here, in fact, is another video. Teaches at Columbia as a part of the reconstruction show at NOMA. So we literally put the competition together because we're searching for an African stage of American design. There's other work that I have done, all right? This is a project that I took on in Birmingham called Taking History to the Streets, where I literally interviewed the Birmingham foot soldiers. Those people were kids in the dog bite pictures and the water hose pictures. So working with them, I literally developed the Birmingham Civil Rights Trail. This is a competition that I ran in Birmingham to find a memorial to be built that would honor the foot soldiers, one by a Chinese woman named Ai Ki-Hopin. Another project in Birmingham where we took an old church, white community fled Birmingham and literally ceded the church over to Birmingham. So for 5 years I worked on turning that into the Alabama Gospel Music and Cultural Arts Center, where the history of gospel music could also find its voice, lift every voice and sing in this abandoned church, and the role that abandoned buildings can play in the revisit and rejuvenation and remembrance of history. Another project I did in Birmingham, this was the Sloss blast furnace, got $100,000 from the endowment. I was trying to figure out a way that I could reboot this old furnace production factory, and I hired Auburn students to design 100 new products out of cast iron that we could literally sell worldwide to basically keep the program going. Cirque du Soleil was one of my partners for this project. I turned this place into a place where we could have filmmaking, dance, industrial design, robotics, and I'm leaving a fifth one out that I can't think of right now. Another project, here we can talk about the role that curation, photography, and books play in remembering history. This is a project that I did in Birmingham where I compared the works of Peter Magubani, who was the official photographer of Mandela in South Africa. He recorded apartheid on one side of the water, and Spider Martin was the official photographer of Selma to Montgomery March. So I did a comparative analysis of both movements side by side. We could literally see how both societies organized civil disobedience to basically put down injustice in either case. It was a major exhibition, 2,000 square feet of space. Each of the photographers' estates loaned me 50 photographs apiece, so it was a 100 photograph dialogue. This is, let's see, Railroad Park. This is memory through cultural geography. Abandoned piece of land. Mayor said, what should I do with it? Turn it into a park. This became a $22 million park. We bid after Highline one year. Is Liz Diller here? We bid after Highline 1 year. And I hired Tom Leader out of Berkeley as a landscape architect. Another project that I did, this is memory through what I call public place branding, where I entered a competition for the Harvey Milk Plaza in San Francisco. I had fountains literally that were gushing milk and honey, so you'll know exactly where you had arrived, all right? Always thinking of a branding opportunity. This is a project that I did in Philadelphia, a competition where 300 enslaved bodies had been found under a public playground. So the question was, what do you do with the dead bodies, all right? So I said, it would really be great if we could begin to talk about design in public places, but you know, W.B. Du Bois wrote the Philadelphia Negro, and he was actually writing about these people who were recently found. So I said, wouldn't it be great to have some of his quotes and graphics from his book that he did, The Philadelphia Negro, and have that emblazoned on an upgraded basketball court. This is Memory Through Immersive Environments. This is a project that I led with Ligaretta and also Abdul Halim, Egyptian architect. This is the largest competition in the world at that time to design the Grand Egyptian Museum. And what I did was, when you came to the museum, you would put on a backpack and you yourself would become an explorer. And upon pilot, you would basically tick off all of the artifacts you wanted to see, and the Palm Pilot would print out for you the shortest route to maneuver through the exhibition in a certain amount of time, right? And then here, what I did was I had a number of boxes. Well, that becomes too complicated to explain. Okay, moving right along. After the Africatown competition was over, the community said, well, now let's build something. And I said, they have absolutely no idea how to build anything. This was just about ideation. But I realized that one of the missing pieces was, once you get a community very excited about the building of something, next you have to tell them how building goes. So I invented this game. I'm going to go back. I invented this game called Spade, Tools of the Trade, how to stack the deck in a community's favor. And so this card game has 52 cards. These are the 52 things you have to know to build anything. And as architects in the audience, these are the things that we carry around with us on a daily basis. You got to know about land use and zoning and low-income tax credit. Well, anyway, I took each of these 52 things and I subdivided them into card suits, all right? And the card suits deal with the club. Those are all the things you need to know to hit somebody over the head to get your way legally, to get control of a piece of land. The diamond, Those are all the tricks of the trade you need to know in order to accumulate wealth for a community. The spade, if you want to dig some dirt, those are all the things you have to know to do dirt digging. And then there's the heart card, which deals with the passion that one has for a community and all of the things that you have to do to turn that passion into promise. And that's the end of my slide.
Well, have we overwhelmed you? Or have you, with these series of presentations, begun to see kind of the complexity of the issues involved in making public space and public art? Thanking all of you guys for fantastic presentations. And I thought that it's a little bit of a Kelly Corrigan move for my first question, but I wanted to ask each of you to talk a little bit about what was kind of the first moment when you knew you were going to be involved in making public art or making public space or urban designing or heading an institution. If you could each talk a little bit about that before we go on to other questions. Yeah. Should be.
I actually have an anecdote. When I was in 3rd grade, it was a cold winter day, and my teacher called me out of class, handed me a stack of black construction paper and 2 patterns, one of Lincoln's profile and the other of Washington's. And she gave me the job of tracing and then cutting out, like, I don't know how many, dozens of these silhouettes. I wasn't sure what she was going to do with them, but it was great getting out of class, and it was a cozy little office that I was in, and the snow was going outside the window, and the radiator was hissing, and I was just so happy. And the next morning I came to school, and somebody had installed them in all the windows of the school. And I just remember thinking, wow, that's just me in the little room doing this, and it's somehow public, and it's massive, and it's architectural, and I think that's what did it for me.
Fantastic.
So I'm not head of an institution. I'm head of just our museum division. But museums were never actually on my radar. When I was studying art history, I thought I was going to become an academic art historian. That's what I trained for, and that's what my graduate school really promoted. And I ended up leaving academia and going to, I always had these conversations in graduate school about what we were doing for society, studying paintings. And I always struggled, and my friends struggled with that question. What were we giving to society through this work, through our doctoral studies? And so when I left academia, I left to take a job teaching at Kamehameha Schools, a school for Native Hawaiian students where a lot of my family went. And that, for me, felt like the right move. At the time, it felt really important for me to give back to my community and to do that public service. But I don't know if any of you here have taught high school. It's not easy. And I ended up, this job became available at the New York Historical Society, and I took a risk. I applied, and I thankfully got the job. And for me, it was the perfect marriage of my desire for public service and my need for rigorous intellectualism. And I really do think that museums are institutions of public service, and so it has been the right fit for me.
Can you hear me? Is it on? Yeah. Okay, great. Well, okay, 7th grade, DC Science Fair. I designed a city of the future with bottle caps and spinning whirligigs and won 4th place. I said, I've got to do that for a living. But fast forward, really my greatest influence was right here in New York. When I went to Columbia's grad school, it just so happened that my work study was with Raquel Ramadi in the Urban Design Group here in New York. All right, and we were working on bonus trade-off legislation and used a lot of the film by H. Holly White, where he had basically documented the way in which people in New York do and do not use plazas. So I cut my teeth in urban design, basically looking at zoning legislation on one hand and human behavior on the other, and trying to give it a value so that we didn't give developers too much leeway without them giving something back that was going to be a usable pedestrian amenity. That's the easiest way to explain.
Thank you all. I think that, my point in asking that question was really to try to understand, as we all understand, we all think of public space, we all have a reaction to it. And so I thought it was important to see how these individuals who are making their careers in working in public space and public art, what was the kind of spark for their reaction? Another question I wanted to ask is, so based on history now at the moment, and you all kind of represented in your presentations very diverse histories, what are some things you think can be brought? I mean, you've presented a lot of things, but what are some things you think are very important and should come to the fore in terms of making public space and public art and relative to monuments? You did some work with the monument you had, the empty monument, and you questioned folks and talked about democracy. I think there are other, I saw your scenes from New York, which also was very innovative, I think, in terms of drawing people in. I mean, there's a kind of consensus building in your work and also in your work that I would like you to talk about a little bit more.
I don't know where to begin. Okay, well, I think the easy answer is civic engagement has got to be at the top of the list, really, because you don't truly understand the history of a people until the people who have been most affected are included in the conversation, all right? Africatown was a very interesting example, all right, because what can I say? There are about 6 community development corporations there, and nobody really was talking to one another. So the design competition was really a kind of master planning proposition to get everybody to come to the table. At first, I was just going to do a design competition around a single building, the imaginary Africatown Museum. And I said, I've got a great idea. I took that back to the community. They said, you've got to be joking. We need more than that. And I said, well, what else do you need? They named 16 things. So I said, okay, I'm going to give everybody what it is they said they wanted. So that's how we got to do the 4 sites and 16 venues. Nothing got left out of the community's list. And so you've got to include the community that is affected, okay, because history is a multivocal affair. It cannot just be top-down telling you what had happened was. You've got to include everybody who was affected by, quote unquote, the venture.
Similar for me, I just want to pick up on that concept of multivocality that is at the core of what I'm trying to do at the New York Historical Society in emphasizing that history is multivocal. History only matters insofar as it means to the present, and it's important to bring multiple perspectives to bear upon it. And this was at the root of the project that Anne-Marie mentioned for Scenes of New York City, and now in our exhibition Lost New York, we involved community voices. So the aim was really, how do we perforate the walls of the museum to bring the public in? And one way to do that was to let go of a little bit of authority, of institutional authority, and respect and honor the fields of expertise that the public brings. So particularly with our Lost New York exhibition, it works so effectively in my mind, because we've brought in people who sometimes through first-person memories, sometimes through intergenerational family memories, bring those lost sites to life. So we have a woman who offers her remembrances of the old Met Opera House, which was torn down in 1967, and she remembers visiting that structure when she was 7 years old in 1939. We have the descendant of somebody who owned a watch shop that kept time for the omnibuses that ran along Broadway that Walt Whitman used to love riding upon. It's a way of honoring the voices of the public that we serve, and having them be a part of the interpretation of history was really what was behind that initiative.
I think for me, you said earlier that one of the questions would be the land as a sort of silent witness, and I guess I've been trying to give some sort of voice to that silence. You know, this place wasn't empty when people came here. There was an incredibly beautiful thing going on here that was driven under. And I think now the chickens have definitely come home to roost, and we're now in this environmental and all sorts of messes. Someone wrote a book, I'm not good with names, but someone wrote a book fairly recently, an indigenous author, called Colonialism is Pollution. So, you know, I don't think of myself as an environmental artist. I think of myself as an artist who thinks that a lot of what was suppressed and erased didn't deserve to be. And if there's some way to embody you know, those absences in a way that will move people, because it's really tough history. The history that we're all celebrating and that we're learning in schools is not the history that really happened here. It's a very sobering history, and I think art is one way that can convey these sorts of things without preaching necessarily, without being accusatory, you know, just sort of creating a space for people to rethink or feel or think about these things. I think art sort of jumps over those resistances that can happen in people, and yeah, that's why I do it.
Thanks. Wonderful answers all. As you guys are talking, I'm reminded of, if you haven't read it, I recommend you go out and buy it immediately. I read it during the pandemic. It's called Braiding Sweetgrass. And it's a book by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and she is a Indigenous American who was trained in Western science, and kind of the book is the genesis, or the way for her to figure out, how can I resolve these two cultures that I know about? How can I resolve what I learned in making, in learning about science in the Western way, and how can I resolve how I am as an Indigenous person who has a different sense of meaning and value to the world I live in. And one of the most impressive pieces of her writing is, or that kind of lit something up in me, is that when she talks about language, the language of Native Americans is a language where all sentient beings are recognized. They're all, people are called he, she, but also the land, the sky, the water, those are also living beings that are appreciated in a different way by different cultures. And so it's a really open-ended question, but I'm just wondering, how each of you would begin to think about creating a new language for how we make public space. I mean, Renee, you've done quite a bit in terms of what you've shown us, but creating a new language that helps us think about our environment in a different way, thinking about, in the West, it's definitely a language of transaction and economy. That's, I think, how we got to our environmental crisis, because we haven't paid attention to the other cultures that are here. But what would be some beginning thoughts about the kind of language of design that you would think about for these issues of public space and public art? Sure.
Speaking of language, the first site that I went to visit in Africatown was the cemetery. And it was the first time I'd ever been to an African burial ground where the names on the tombstones were in an African language as well as the plantation name. I can't tell you how riveting that was. Most African Americans, we can spit on the cotton and turn it into, the DNA folks and find out, which tribe we come from, geographic region, but none of us know our African names, all right? So linguistically, part of the challenge of interpreting Africatown is going back and reaching into those African languages for meanings that we have perhaps forgotten. In a lot of the language of the Africans, even, the Ashantis have the Adinkra symbols. Each tribe has a method of talking and also documenting words, symbols, thoughts, and ideas. And I'll just give a brief example, a linguistic example. In the Ashanti tribe, they have the Sankofa bird, that bird that's looking back over its tail. And that's a symbol of never to forget the history or never to forget where you've come from. So a lot of the symbol systems of indigenous people, whether they're indigenous to Africa or indigenous to America, are the language is everything, because it really forms a mental picture of belief that the culture really rests upon in terms of its spiritual foundation.
Yes, we're a very relational sort of culture. So we think of these, waters and lands and everything on it as our relations. We're in a kinship relationship to them. And like, for example, I'm a Turtle Clan person, so that's a matrilineal clan. So we call ourselves after animals, we're in that sort of relationship. And Haudenosaunee, which is our name for ourselves, the people of the Longhouse, the Iroquois Confederacy, or the Six Nations, what that translates into is they build the house. And so we think of our territory, or our original territory, which is more than 80% of present-day New York State, as a communal longhouse. And the Mohawk people, my people, were at the eastern door, and then there was a central fire, the Onondaga people and the Seneca people at the western door. So we literally had a homeland here, It was, all these symbols are sort of simple, but very true, And when I think about when I was doing this piece with the middens, I was thinking about that, that site of that beautiful pond that was gone, and the beautiful midden that had, represented, millennia of people being able to just fish and feast in a beautiful spot. And and then I'm out on a boat with a video camera, and and somehow the collision between the shells and the video was a useful one, and in some way they exchange qualities. I think the video sort of melted the shells, and the shells hardened the video. And there was some sort of conversation going on that was not exactly just me, just, declaiming something. I was trying to, again, in some sort of relational way, and then bring in the songs, which were so powerful. So I think, and also just partnering with the Billion Oyster Project, who are doing, God's work in the harbor there, right? I mean, it's just amazing what they're doing. So I think that these kinds of partnerships are the way to go. I'm just, happy that I landed where I did with these sorts of things, so that's it.
I want to pick up on this idea of declaiming, of declamation. I feel a little bit hesitant to say this just because my métier is words. I think art history is about translating the visual into the verbal, and that's the meat of what I do. But I want to add into the mix of our conversation another type of language, which is visual language, which doesn't necessarily need exegesis. And I'm thinking in particular of a conversation that I had with Kay Walkingstick, the contemporary Cherokee artist whose exhibition we just closed, Kay Walkingstick, Hudson River School. And we had on loan to us this large painting, very sculptural, maybe 70 by 70 inches, and it was dark. It's a very, very, very dark green. It looks almost black, and cutting right through all of those built-up layers of paint is these two giant red slashes. So Kay took what was, I believe, a screwdriver, and she just cut through to expose all of these paint layers to beneath. And I said to her, this is, it's such a violent painting, and I want to open the exhibition with this painting and talk about ravages on the land and colonization, and then set up your other landscape paintings, your more recent landscape paintings, as a reclamation of that ravaged, colonized land. And she looked at me and she said, "Oh no, Wendy, this is not what this painting is about. It's not about violence. It is about sex and sensuality." And it was a moment of realization for me. And what I appreciated about that conversation was the exchange. And it was that Kay let my interpretation sit there. And she let it exist, even though I ended up reconfiguring the exhibition because I wanted to honor her intent behind the work. She said to me, art is a language in itself. It speaks to you the way it speaks to you. And I think that picks up on a part of your presentation, Alan. I think that art creates a space, I think that's the term you used, to maybe speak to us in a way that verbal language cannot, make us stop and ponder and maybe go forth and learn more.
Wonderful. I mean, this conversation was never intended to be focused, but more broad-reaching, which you guys have all lent your conversation and your presentations to. It's time, I think, to open it up to the audience to see if anyone has any questions about what we've presented tonight. And Salmata is over there, so if you have a question, she'll bring a mic to you.
Hello, I'm Taylor. I think my question kind of pertains to the fact that I think each one of you represents a very unique individual culture, your own perspective. And I wonder how those perspectives can kind of be layered upon one another, because I do think sometimes when we engage with the community, it is somewhat one particular lens over the other, and I wonder how we can create more of a layered community experience that does kind of capture all very different and unique perspectives, because we have different stages here historically, even represented in the panel, that I think could be interesting to see how they overlay.
Wow, I tell you, the first thing that came to my mind as an example is the importance of intercultural communication, all right? Because we all are representing a number of disciplines that are probably all tied to architecture and built environment in some kind of way, but there's got to be a dialogue, you know? And I'm going to give you a really good example of what happens when there's not a dialogue from two well-meaning sets of people. In Africatown, once the Clotilda, the last slave ship, was found, the tourism agency in Mobile got really excited. They said, "This is fantastic news. We're going to build a replica of the Clotilda, and we're going to sell tickets for dinner and martinis on a replica of the Clotilda as we take tourists to the discovery site where the real Clotilda is still underwater. Ain't that a great idea?" And the Clotilda descendants said, "Are you out of your minds? This is not a Walt Disney theme park situation," all right? Because our response to that boat is not your response to that boat. The majority culture's response to the boat was, "Isn't this a fine American artifact, one of the greatest marine archaeological finds in this country in centuries?" The Black population in Africatown said, "How dare you talk about the discovery of the boat and then talk about the discovery of Africatown when Africatown has been here for more than 160 some years and been totally ignored." So that intercultural communication is important. One last example I'll give for Africatown. Once the boat was found, everyone turned their head to Africatown and said, "Oh my God, we've ignored this community for a decade." It's very blighted. It's some of the worst poverty that you ever want to see. The resilience of the people is strong, but the material culture is quite wanting. And so the first thing that the embarrassed mayor did was to finally put streetlights in Africatown. And I said, "Boy, is that like the dog wagging the tail, because shouldn't you fix it up before you shine a light on it?" That's what I was thinking. So intercultural communication, I think, is important so that all voices kind of hash it out before the story gets public.
You know, it's a great question, and I think the answer is really the work has to be done, and it's often hard. I think there's no other way to do it than to have the difficult conversations and to, do the best that you can to navigate all of the diverse and sometimes conflicting viewpoints. But that's the beauty of multivocality, that we are not a monolith. Native cultures are not a monolith. No culture is a monolith, and then you bring all of those cultures together, and it's so diverse, and you have so many competing viewpoints. And how do you manage that? And it's difficult. I would just say I learned at an AAMC conference. I can't remember the name of the speaker, unfortunately, but he gave a wonderful presentation about how to navigate diversity in the workplace. And he made this, what I thought was a really helpful and beautiful viewpoint, which is that we all have multiple selves. We all have dominant selves, and we all have subordinate selves. So, one of my subordinate selves might be that I'm Native, might be that I'm a woman. One of my dominant selves might be that, I never had to struggle economically. And so when you're having a conversation with somebody, you need to know which self you are inhabiting. So, if I am talking to a white person who is struggling financially, who grew up, with close to nothing, I need to, recognize that I need to recognize the dominant position in which I am standing and honor what this person is telling me about that subject. Whereas if I am talking to, a white person and I am talking about the history of the Hawaiian Islands and it's very personal to me and I'm talking about the struggles of that particular community of mine, then I hope that that person would recognize that they need to honor the subordinate self position from which I am speaking. So that's the wisdom that was shared with me.
I think you said that art is also a language. I think it is. And it's the language of beauty. And I think that we're all susceptible to it. That doesn't mean that you have to like all art, and all art isn't likable. And I love the democracy of art. I love that, unlike performance where you're sort of stuck, maybe stuck in a good way or stuck in a bad way, you can walk right by a visual, piece of visual art. It doesn't stop you. It'll only stop you if you are attracted to it, and if you give it the time of day. But it needs to be attractive for you to give it the time of day. And then I think all sorts of things can happen that bridge cultures. The name of that piece, I've titled pieces in native languages, but that piece was titled after a Thoreau quote, Earth's Eye. And in no respect was it, excluding anyone. It was just about this pond that was once there, whose springs are cooling the criminal courts building's air conditioning system now. So that's just the sorts of things. I think these little things are instructive. The things that I've turned up just looking at sites in New York, examples of what seems to me like definite human folly, like just repeated and repeated and repeated. And I think we need to do better, and I think art can be a vehicle of trying to do better.
Any other questions?
Great talk, thank you. I think for Wendy, relative to the use of objects as a visual language to communicate, and obviously a lot of objects are unattractive and have bad connotations, bad histories in our own history. And I think of things like the Robert E. Lee sculpture in Richmond and examples where they're removed and they're gotten rid of, melted down in ways to eliminate the ability of people that may sympathize with those monuments to do something that we wouldn't want them to do with them. And it seems to me like there's a great opportunity to reinterpret them and use them as teaching tools in a later generation, even though we may not be ready for that right now. And I wonder if your instinct is to preserve even ugly monuments like that for future generations to learn from.
That's a very difficult question to answer. I think there's so many considerations, so many ideas to consider what to do with ugly monuments, as you term them. Do we lay them down? Do we half bury them? Do we project other imagery upon them? Do we preserve them tucked away, hidden from sight, to be brought out later and reinterpreted, as I think you're asking about? I think there are. I don't have an answer. I think that there are so many possibilities to reinterpret. I do think, and I'm just speaking personally, the idea of taking a monument and melting it down and repurposing it to me is really interesting because the material is still there, and the history of the old monument is embedded in this new monument. It's embedded in the form, but you do lose the original, the shape of the original piece. So maybe, you create an intervention by, by complicating it, by, if you want to leave the piece intact, by laying it down, I was upon one of those Confederate monuments, I can't remember which one, that you had a lot of digital projections thrown onto them, which was a way of not touching the work, but changing its content. So I guess my answer is I think there are a lot of creative ways to approach those monuments, but I do personally think that that intervention, reinterpretation is needed because of the way, and you all will know this better than I do, but I mean, because of the way that monuments take up space and make you move around them and look up to them. I think that matters when they're in public places. And even when you bring them into museums, this is where language does matter, verbal language does matter. One of the questions that I've thought a lot about is, how do you, if you have a figure of, a proud Confederate general, or if you have a crouching, slumped over Black figure or Native figure, how do you mediate that immediate visual impact without turning to language? And not asking visitors to come up and read, a paragraph or open an app and listen to an explanation or an interpretation. How do you visually change that immediate impact? And I don't really have an answer to that, but it's a question that's been on my mind.
I think you can add something to it, or you can reposition it. I mean, literally and figuratively. Not long after the fall of the wall in 1989, I visited Budapest for the first time, and I was taken outside of the city to this field where they had assembled all their heroic monuments, the communist monuments, and they were all out in the field, with like this, and it just looked so silly. I mean, it really did. It was comedic. And I think if you did the same thing with all those Confederate people on the horseback, and they're all in some bizarre cavalry sort of formation, I think it would be equally strange. So you could do something like that. But I also like the idea of, like the Patriots, with King George's statue, just repurposing, that was then, this is now, radically. Yeah, anyways.
What I find very interesting is it's really because of the Mellon Foundation and their national audit that they did in monuments that we're paying such strict attention, not to just individuated site-specific, white men on horses, but that audit that they did, and you can pull it up, online as a PDF. When you look at the numbers of white men on horses cross-country, I mean, the message is, honestly, I'm from DC. I live near Grant Circle. There's a white man on the horse. Never thought about it in a million years. I'm almost 100 years old, and I never thought about it. I never thought about the white man on the horse. In DC, we have a whole bunch of white men on horses sitting in the middle of circles. It was backdrop for me. I didn't even ever question it. But when Kehinde Wiley did that sculpture of the brother with dreads on the horse, I was like, now that's a powerful brother on a horse, So part of it, yeah, if you destroy it and take it away, we never really get to call for the question, With it there, we get to question it, and it needs to be questioned, and I do think there needs to be a response to what that means. Most people never even knew what those men on horses was about. We just took it for granted because we've seen pictures of them in, Greco-Roman history. All of their warriors, gladiators. So we just kind of bought the Kool-Aid, you know. It's almost like the white Jesus, hate to talk about it. But, you know, I remember going to my family church in D.C. and saying, I'm never coming back until you take that picture of the white Jesus off the wall. And my minister was like, what? No, in the Bible it says he had hair of wool and his feet were the color of copper. So how did we go from the image that's described in the Bible to this very strange blue-eyed blonde? And I'm going to tell you how it happened, if I may. And I didn't learn this till I went to the Architectural Association in London and studied with Paul Oliver for 2 years. He was a member of the Royal Institute of Cultural Geographers, all right? And he taught world history at the AA, at the Architectural Association. And he said, let me tell you why most of the Western world believes in the image of the white Jesus with the blonde hair and the blue eyes. Because when Michelangelo was commissioned to do the Sistine Chapel, he used his own relatives as the models. It's as simple as that. Because prior to that, you know, there was the Black Madonna that was going on in Portugal, Morocco, and those countries. So if we don't ask those kinds of questions, we could run off thinking that Jesus is supposed to be a white man with blonde hair and blue eyes, not because the Bible said so, but because it was very convenient for the artist who had the commission to use the people he was surrounded with in order to be the models of that story. Yeah.
And it was the world he knew.
And it was the world he knew. There were quite a few women Renaissance painters also that have never gotten the glory that they deserve. We don't even know about them. I never asked who was the female counterpart to the Michelangelo, okay? It probably was his contemporary's daughter who was in the studio mixing the paints for her dad and also learned how to do that activity. That's another story.
Indeed. Any last questions? We have to wrap it up very soon. Okay. I want to thank you all for coming. Please thank our wonderful speakers. And until next time.